At least someone found you. Those 5 words cut through the champagne toasts and congratulations like a knife through silk. My mother, Patricia Caldwell, said it with that particular smile she reserved for public humiliation disguised as affection. She was adjusting my engagement ring under the soft glow of the garden lights, surrounded by our closest friends and family, when she delivered what she probably thought was a loving observation. The entire backyard fell silent. 37 people who had gathered to celebrate my engagement to Marcus Rivera suddenly found their champagne glasses fascinating. My best friend Jessica's mouth literally fell open. Even Marcus, who was usually quick with a comeback, just stood there frozen, holding a half-eaten canapé. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But me? I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I didn't create the scene my mother was clearly expecting. Instead, I did something that surprised everyone, including myself. I smiled. A real, genuine smile that seemed to unnerve her more than any outburst could have. "Thank you, Mom," I said clearly, my voice carrying across the suddenly quiet garden. "That's exactly what I needed to hear tonight." The silence that followed was deafening. I could see my Aunt Margaret, shifting uncomfortably by the dessert table, her husband, Uncle Robert, suddenly very interested in his phone. Marcus's colleagues from the private academy where he taught were exchanging glances, probably wondering if they should pretend they hadn't heard anything. His parents, Dr. Thomas Rivera and his wife Carol, looked like they wanted to disappear into the manicured hedges. My mother's smile faltered for just a moment, replaced by something that looked almost like panic. She wasn't used to me responding with anything other than hurt silence or embarrassed laughter. This calm acceptance seemed to throw her off script. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't mean it like that," she said quickly, her voice pitched higher now, more defensive. "I just meant—" "I know exactly what you meant," I interrupted gently, still smiling, "and I want everyone here to know exactly what you meant too." I turned to face the crowd of people who had come to celebrate what was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. Teachers from my school, Marcus's sophisticated friends from San Francisco, relatives who only appeared at major life events, neighbors who'd watched me grow up in this very backyard. "My mother just expressed how surprised she is that someone would want to marry me," I announced, my voice clear and steady. "She's been expressing various versions of this sentiment my entire life, so I thought it was only fair that you all understand the family dynamic you're celebrating tonight." Marcus finally found his voice. "Riley, stop, you're embarrassing yourself." And there it was. Not, "You're embarrassing your mother," or "You're making people uncomfortable." "You're embarrassing yourself." As if standing up for my own dignity was something shameful. I turned to look at him, this man I'd planned to spend my life with, and saw something in his expression that chilled me more than my mother's casual cruelty. He looked annoyed. Not protective, not angry on my behalf, not even particularly surprised by what my mother had said. Just annoyed that I was making a scene. "Am I embarrassing myself, Marcus?" I asked quietly. "Or am I finally refusing to be embarrassed by other people's opinions of my worth?" He glanced around at the watching faces, clearly calculating the social cost of this moment. "Can we please just go inside and talk about this privately?" "Of course," I said. Then I turned to Marcus, kissed him gently on the cheek, and whispered just loud enough for the front row to hear, "We need to talk. Inside. Now." As I walked toward the house, I heard the conversation starting up again behind me, hushed, urgent whispers that would probably continue long after the party ended. I caught fragments. "Always been sensitive. Wedding stress. Hope they work it out." My engagement ring felt suddenly heavy on my finger. Not because of what my mother had said, I'd heard worse from her over the years, but because of what I saw in Marcus's eyes in that moment of silence. It wasn't shock at my mother's cruelty. It wasn't anger on my behalf. It wasn't the protective fury I would have felt if someone had spoken to him that way. It was something else entirely, something that looked dangerously close to agreement. And that realization, that the man I was planning to marry might see me exactly the way my mother did, hit me like a physical blow. That moment, standing in my childhood backyard, surrounded by people celebrating a future that suddenly felt like a performance, wasn't the end of anything. It was the beginning. The beginning of discovering that sometimes the person you think knows you best might be the one who sees you least clearly. And sometimes, the cruelest truth comes wrapped in congratulations and fairy lights. What happened next changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and the difference between being chosen and being settled for. But first, let me tell you how I got to that garden, to that ring, to that moment when everything I thought was real started to crumble. I was never the daughter my mother wanted. That distinction belonged to my younger sister Sophia, who seemed to glide through life collecting achievements like some people collect stamps. Harvard law degree, partnership at a prestigious firm by 30, married to a surgeon named Dr. James Wellington, 2 perfect children who called me Aunt Riley, in voices that sounded like tiny angels. The comparisons started early. At elementary school talent shows, Sophia would perform perfect piano recitals while I read original poems that made adults shift uncomfortably in their seats. At high school graduation, she was valedictorian, giving the inspiring speech about reaching for excellence, while I was the quiet kid in the back row who'd won the creative writing award that nobody really understood. College was where the divide became a chasm. Sophia went to Harvard on a full academic scholarship, joined prestigious clubs, networked with future politicians and CEOs. I went to Portland State University on a partial scholarship I'd earned through essay contests, worked 20 hours a week at a campus bookstore, and spent my free time in coffee shops writing poetry that professors called promising but unmarketable. My mother had a particular way of introducing us at family gatherings. This is Sophia, my lawyer daughter. She just made partner at Morrison & Associates. Then, almost as an afterthought, and this is Riley. She's still figuring things out. The phrase "still figuring things out" followed me through my 20s like a shadow. When I graduated with my English degree, it was still figuring things out. When I got my teaching certification, it was still figuring things out. When I landed a job at Riverside High School teaching AP Literature and started a creative writing club that had a waiting list, it was still figuring things out. Meanwhile, Sophia's achievements were announced via family email newsletters that my mother sent to distant relatives. Sophia wins another case. Sophia and James buy their second home. Sophia's children accepted to elite private schools. Me? I was a footnote. Riley is still teaching. Or Riley moved to a new apartment. Or simply no mention at all. The teaching job was everything I'd wanted. Riverside High was in a working-class district where kids needed someone to believe in them, where literature could be a lifeline instead of just another requirement. I taught students who reminded me of myself, the quiet ones, the dreamers, the kids who saw the world differently and worried that made them wrong. I'd been there for 5 years when I met Marcus at a teacher training conference in Seattle. He was giving a presentation on educational technology, confident, articulate, impressive in that effortless way that made people lean forward when he spoke. He taught at St. Bartholomew's Academy, one of those private schools where tuition cost more than most people's annual salary. After his session, I approached him with a question about implementing digital portfolios in English classes. He not only answered thoroughly, but offered to send me resources and invited me to coffee. Over espresso at a tiny cafe near the convention center, we talked for 3 hours about education, about reaching students, about the difference between teaching and inspiring. He seemed genuinely interested in my work with struggling readers, in the poetry workshops I ran after school, in my philosophy that every student had a story worth telling. When he walked me to my car, he asked if he could call me. Marcus was everything my mother noticed immediately when I brought him home for Christmas 8 months later. He drove a Tesla, wore expensive suits even on weekends, and spoke with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never having to prove you belong somewhere. "He's wonderful, Riley," she told me privately while we were washing dishes after Christmas dinner. "Stable, successful, presentable. Don't mess this up." "What do you mean, don't mess this up?" She handed me a plate to dry, not meeting my eyes. "I mean, don't get too intense. Men like Marcus have options. You need to be easy to be with. Uncomplicated." At the time, I thought she was just being protective, worried that I might come on too strong or scare him away with my tendency to overthink everything. I didn't realize she was giving me a blueprint for making myself smaller. The relationship felt easy at first. Marcus was attentive, thoughtful, always planning elaborate dates and surprise weekend trips. He'd send flowers to my classroom with notes that made my students giggle and tease me. He'd text sweet messages during my lunch breaks and listen patiently when I read him my poetry, even the terrible ones I was too embarrassed to show anyone else. Our worlds were different. His filled with private school politics and dinner parties with other successful couples, mine centered around teenagers with complicated lives and weekend trips to independent bookstores. But it felt like we balanced each other. He brought sophistication to my simple life. I brought authenticity to his polished world. When he proposed after 18 months, in front of the entire faculty at his school's end-of-year gala, it felt like a fairy tale. The ring was beautiful, the setting was perfect, and the applause from his colleagues made me feel like I was being welcomed into something important. But fairy tales, I was learning, sometimes have darker undertones that only become visible in the right light. There were small things I'd noticed but dismissed. The way Marcus would gently correct my grammar during dinner conversations with his colleagues. As if my teaching credentials somehow didn't qualify me to speak properly. How he'd suggest I wear the black dress instead of the colorful one when we went to important events, because conservative is always classier. The subtle way he'd redirect conversations when I mentioned my writing, steering them toward more practical topics like lesson planning or school administration. His friends, all successful professionals with impressive titles, had a way of talking about my career that made it sound like a hobby I'd eventually outgrow. Teaching must be so rewarding, they'd say in the same tone people use to compliment children's artwork. It's nice that you can make a difference. You're so lucky you found someone who accepts you as you are, my mother had said during our engagement dinner, reaching across the table to pat Marcus's hand. The word accepts stuck with me for days. Not loves or cherishes or adores, accepts like I was a compromise he was graciously willing to make. Then there were Marcus's friends, particularly his best friend Kyle Thompson, an investment banker who seemed to view our relationship as some kind of social experiment. Marcus always was drawn to the underdog, he'd joked at a dinner party, while Marcus laughed along. Remember in college how you'd tutor all those struggling students? Same energy. The comparison between me and his college charity work sat uncomfortably in my chest, but I pushed it aside. Kyle was known for inappropriate comments. Marcus had warned me about his lack of filter. But the warning signs were there, scattered like breadcrumbs through our entire relationship. The way Marcus would book restaurants without asking what I was in the mood for. Always choosing places that reflected his taste, his budget, his idea of sophistication. How he'd share stories about me with his friends that focused on my quirks and naivete rather than my strengths or accomplishments. The subtle but consistent message that I was lucky to be included in his world, rather than him being fortunate to have found his way into mine. I just hadn't been hungry enough for the truth to follow those breadcrumbs to their inevitable destination. But standing in that garden, watching my fiancé's face as my mother delivered her casual cruelty, I suddenly realized I'd been starving for authentic love for longer than I cared to admit. And what I was about to discover would prove that sometimes the person you're planning to marry is the one who understands you least of all. Inside the house, away from the party guests who were probably dissecting my mother's comment over the shrimp cocktail, Marcus immediately went into damage control mode. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Riley, you know she didn't mean it like that, he said, reaching for my hands. Your mom just has a unique way of expressing affection. I pulled away gently but firmly. How did she mean it, Marcus? He shifted uncomfortably, loosening his tie, the expensive silk one his mother had bought him for special occasions. Everything about Marcus was carefully curated, from his designer watch to his perfectly styled hair. Even in crisis, he looked like he'd stepped out of a magazine. She's just happy you're settling down, getting married, building a stable life. Settling down, I repeated slowly. Is that what you think I'm doing? Settling? That's not what I meant. But his voice lacked conviction, and he wouldn't meet my eyes. Instead, he was looking around my childhood living room like he was seeing it for the first time. The mismatched furniture, the family photos in different-sized frames, the bookshelf overflowing with paperbacks and literary magazines. I sat down on the living room couch, the same ugly floral pattern my mother had refused to replace for 15 years. Everything in this house stayed exactly the same, just like everyone's expectations of me. The coffee table still had the ring stains from when Sophia and I would set our drinks down without coasters. The lamp in the corner still had the shade that was slightly crooked from when I'd knocked it over during a particularly dramatic teenage phone conversation. "Marcus, I need you to be honest with me about something," I said quietly. "When you proposed, what did you say to your parents about me?" He went very still, like a deer that had just noticed a hunter. "What do you mean?" "I mean, how did you describe me? What did you tell them about why you wanted to marry me? What words did you use?" The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Outside, I could hear the party continuing, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses creating a surreal soundtrack to what felt like the most important conversation of my life. Someone had turned on music, probably Jessica, trying to fill the awkward silence my exit had created. "I told them you were sweet," he said finally, the word coming out like he was pulling it from somewhere deep and reluctant. "Kind, that you'd make a good wife." "A good wife," I nodded slowly, feeling something cold settle in my stomach. "Not that you loved me. Not that I challenged you, or inspired you, or made you laugh until your sides hurt. Not that I was brilliant or talented, or that my writing moved you. A good wife." "Riley, of course I love you." "Do you?" I interrupted. "Or do you love the idea of me, the grateful teacher who thinks she won the lottery because someone successful chose her?" He opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand. The engagement ring caught the light from the overhead fixture, the same brass chandelier that had been there since I was 12. It felt suddenly heavy, like it was weighing down my entire arm. "I overheard you talking to Kyle last month," I continued, my voice steady despite the earthquake happening in my chest. "At your birthday party, you were in the kitchen, and I was coming back from the bathroom. You said, and I quote, 'Riley's not like other women. She's low maintenance, no drama, no impossible expectations. Sometimes it's nice to be with someone who's just grateful.'" The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might need to sit down. "You weren't supposed to hear that. But you said it, and that night when I asked you what you and Kyle were talking about, you said nothing important." I stood up, surprising myself with how steady I felt. "That conversation was about me, about our relationship, about your actual feelings toward the woman you just proposed to. And you called it nothing important." Marcus sat down heavily in my father's old recliner, the leather cracked and faded from years of use. He looked smaller somehow, diminished. "It came out wrong. I was trying to explain to Kyle why I was ready to settle down. You're stable, reliable." "Stop." My voice was sharper now, cutting through his attempt at explanation. "Just stop. Every word you're saying is making this worse." I walked to the window and looked out at our engagement party. My co-workers from Riverside High were chatting with his colleagues from St. Bartholomew's Academy, two worlds that had never quite fit together. My college friends were mingling with his family. Jessica was probably making polite conversation with my mother while internally composing the text she'd send me later about what a nightmare this was. Mrs. Henderson from next door was there, the sweet elderly woman who'd always praised my creative writing when I was growing up. She was talking to Marcus's sister, Dr. Catherine Rivera Chen, a pediatric surgeon who had the same polished confidence as her brother. I wondered what they were discussing, whether Catherine was explaining how refreshing it was that Marcus had found someone so, quote, uncomplicated. "I need some time to think," I said without turning around. "Think about what?" "About whether I want to marry someone who sees me as a consolation prize." "That's not." "It is, though." I finally turned to face him, and something in my expression must have told him to stop talking. "Your mom asked me last week what my 5-year plan was. You know what you said? Riley's not really a planner. She's more of a go-with-the-flow type. As if having a simple life means having no ambitions or dreams." I walked over to where I'd left my purse and pulled out a small notebook, the one where I'd been writing down ideas for the novel I'd been working on for 3 years. The cover was worn soft from being carried everywhere, filled with character sketches and plot outlines and fragments of dialogue I'd captured during my lunch breaks. "This is my 5-year plan," I said, holding it up. "It's not corporate ladder climbing or stock portfolios. It's stories I want to tell, students I want to inspire, A book I want to finish. But you've never asked about it because you've never seen it as real. Marcus looked genuinely confused, like I'd just started speaking a foreign language. I didn't know you were serious about writing. That's the problem. You didn't know because you never asked. In 18 months of dating, you've never once asked to read anything I've written or wanted to discuss my goals or dreams beyond how they fit into your life plan. I thought about all the times I'd mention my writing, how he'd nod politely and then change the subject to something more practical, how he'd never asked about the workshops I attended on weekends or the literary magazines I submitted to, how when I'd gotten a poem published in a small journal he'd said, "That's nice," and immediately started talking about his promotion. You know what you did when I told you I'd been accepted to that writer's retreat in Vermont last summer? I continued. You said, "But what about our vacation to Napa?" Like my creative development was just an inconvenience that interfered with your plans. I thought we'd already decided on Napa. You decided on Napa. You booked it without asking me. And when I said I wanted to do the retreat instead, you made me feel guilty for changing our plans even though I'd never agreed to them in the first place. I slipped off my engagement ring and set it gently on the coffee table between us. Not thrown dramatically, not slammed down in anger. Just placed there quietly, like a period at the end of a sentence. "I'm not breaking up with you," I said quickly, seeing his panic. "But I'm not going forward with this engagement until I figure out if you actually want to marry me. Or if you just want to marry the version of me that makes you feel generous and settled." I grabbed my jacket from the closet, the same coat closet where my mother used to hang my school backpack when I was little. "I'm going to my apartment. Please tell everyone I had a headache. And Marcus, when people ask you about me in the future, maybe try describing who I actually am instead of who you think I should be grateful to become." "It out?" I paused with my hand on the doorknob. "That's exactly what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to figure out if there's anything to work out, or if we've just been playing house with two completely different scripts." I left through the side door, avoiding the party entirely, and for the first time in months, driving away from my own engagement party, I felt like I could breathe. What I didn't know was that my quiet exit was about to reveal truths that would make my mother's casual cruelty look like a love letter. I spent the weekend in my studio apartment, which suddenly felt less like a temporary space and more like a sanctuary. I made coffee in my favorite mismatched mugs, read poetry on my tiny balcony, and worked on my novel without anyone suggesting I use my time more productively. Marcus texted constantly, first apologetic, then confused, then increasingly frustrated. By Sunday evening, his messages had shifted from, "I'm sorry, can we talk?" to, "You're being dramatic about a misunderstanding." But it was Jessica who brought me the information that changed everything. She showed up Monday night with takeout from our favorite Thai place and a bottle of wine, settling onto my couch with the determination of someone who had news to deliver. "I need to tell you something about Saturday night," she said, not even waiting for pleasantries. "After you left." I set down my pad thai. "What happened?" "Your mom was holding court by the dessert table, explaining to anyone who'd listen that you'd always been sensitive, and that Marcus was so patient with your moods. She was actually getting sympathy for having to deal with your, quote, dramatic exit." I groaned. "That sounds exactly like her." "But here's the thing," Jessica continued, leaning forward. "I was standing near Marcus and Kyle when your mom came over to them, and Riley. What they said to her was so much worse than anything she said about you." My stomach dropped. "What do you mean?" Jessica pulled out her phone. "I recorded part of it. I was taking videos of the party earlier, and when I saw them talking, something felt off, so I kept recording." She handed me her phone, and I pressed play. The audio was a bit muffled, but I could clearly hear my mother's voice, then Marcus's, then Kyle's. "Such a kind girl," my mother was saying. "I just worry she doesn't really understand how good she has it. She's always been a bit naive about these things." "That's actually what attracted me to her initially," Marcus's voice replied. "The simplicity. No games, no complications. What you see is what you get." "Exactly," Kyle chimed in. "Remember when you were dating Rebecca? All those demands, all that drama about her career? Riley's just easy." "And grateful," my mother added with a laugh. "Sometimes I think she can't quite believe someone like you would want someone like her." There was a pause, then Marcus spoke again, and his words felt like ice water in my veins. "Well, let's be honest. She's not exactly a catch in the traditional sense, but she's loyal, she's uncomplicated, and she'll never cheat or leave because she knows she got lucky. Sometimes that's worth more than passion. The recording continued for another minute, with my mother actually agreeing that I was lucky to find someone willing to overlook my lack of ambition, and Marcus confirming that he appreciated having a partner who knew her place. I handed the phone back to Jessica, my hands shaking slightly. "There's more," she said gently. "I talked to some of his colleagues after you left. Riley, they've been talking about you like this for months. They call you Marcus's charity case behind your back. They think the whole relationship is him settling for someone safe because he got tired of dating women who challenged him." I stood up and walked to my kitchen window, looking out at the bookstore below. Mrs. Chen, the owner, was locking up for the night, her movements familiar and comforting. "How long have you known?" I asked. I suspected something was off, but I didn't have proof until Saturday, and honestly, I hoped I was wrong. I turned back to her. "His family? From what I could gather, they see you exactly the way he does." His sister made some comment about how, quote, refreshing it was that Marcus found someone who wouldn't compete with his career or have, quote, unrealistic expectations about lifestyle. The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Every thoughtful gesture, every romantic surprise, every moment I'd felt cherished. All of it viewed through the lens of his certainty that I should be grateful for the attention. "You know what's funny?" I said, sitting back down. "I actually thought I was lucky. Not because I'm not good enough for him, but because I thought I'd found someone who loved me for who I am. Turns out, he loves me for who I'm not." Jessica reached over and squeezed my hand. "What are you going to do?" I looked at the engagement ring I'd placed on my dresser earlier, catching the light from my reading lamp. For the first time since Saturday night, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I'm going to stop being grateful for scraps and start demanding the whole meal. But first, I needed to understand exactly how deep this went. Because if Marcus had been discussing our relationship this casually with friends and strangers, what else had he been saying? And more importantly, what else had he been planning? The answers I found over the next few days would prove that sometimes the person you trust most is the one hiding the biggest lies. And sometimes, discovering those lies is the best thing that can happen to you. Tuesday morning, I did something I'd never done before. I called in sick when I wasn't actually sick, drove to San Francisco, and parked across the street from Marcus's school. I wasn't stalking him. I was conducting research. During his lunch break, I watched him meet with a woman I didn't recognize at a coffee shop near the campus. She was elegant, polished, exactly the type of person who looked like she belonged in his world. They sat close together, her hand occasionally touching his arm as they talked. I took photos, not for drama, but for documentation. That evening, I did what any self-respecting English teacher would do. I researched. I went through Marcus's social media more carefully than I ever had. Looked up the woman from the coffee shop, Dr. Vanessa Hartwell, according to the private school's website, newly hired philosophy department head, and started paying attention to patterns I'd previously ignored. The evidence painted a picture I'd been too trusting to see. Marcus had been having lunch with Dr. Hartwell twice a week for the past month. His social media showed careful cropping, photos that seemed like they were of him alone, but shadows and reflections suggested otherwise. His late faculty meetings that had become increasingly frequent. But the real revelation came when I accessed our shared phone plan online. I'd been managing the account since we moved in together, and the detailed call logs told a story that made my stomach turn. Hours-long conversations with Vanessa's number, starting 3 weeks after our engagement. Text messages sent during times when he'd told me he was grading papers or in meetings. I screenshot everything. Thursday evening, Marcus came to my apartment with flowers and that practiced smile that I was now seeing for what it was. "I think we need to talk about the wedding planning," he said, settling onto my couch like everything was normal. "My mom has some opinions about the venue." "I bet she does," I said, remaining standing. "But before we talk about wedding planning, I need you to tell me about Vanessa Hartwell." The color drained from his face so quickly I thought he might faint. "I don't know what you mean." I pulled out my phone and showed him one of the photos I'd taken. "This was Tuesday. You told me you had a faculty lunch about curriculum changes." He stared at the image, then looked up at me with something I'd never seen before: fear. Riley, it's not what you think. What do I think, Marcus? He ran his hands through his hair, the careful composure finally cracking. She's someone I knew before I met you. She just started working at our school. Someone you knew how? The silence stretched between us like a canyon. We dated. In graduate school. It ended badly. I sat down across from him, maintaining eye contact. And now? Now nothing. We're colleagues. We've been working together on a curriculum project. I opened my phone again and scrolled through the call logs I'd screenshot. Curriculum projects that require 2-hour phone conversations at midnight? Text messages at 6 a.m. on Sundays? His face went through several expressions: surprise, panic, calculation, and finally, something that looked almost like relief. How long have you known? He asked quietly. I started suspecting Saturday night. I've been investigating since Tuesday. I leaned forward. What I want to know is how long this has been going on, and whether you were planning to tell me before or after the wedding. Marcus buried his face in his hands. When he looked up, the mask was completely off. She came back into my life the week after I proposed to you, he said. She'd been offered the position at our school, and she called to let me know she'd be moving back to the area. And she said she'd made a mistake letting me go, that she'd been thinking about me, about us, for years. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching this conversation happen to someone else. So you decided to have an emotional affair with your ex while planning a wedding with me. It's not an affair. We haven't done anything physical. But you want to. He couldn't meet my eyes. I don't know, maybe, yes, I'm confused. I stood up and walked to my bookshelf, running my fingers along the spines of my favorite novels. Stories about people who faced impossible choices and somehow found their way to truth. Here's what's going to happen, I said, turning back to him. You're gonna leave. You're gonna figure out what you actually want. And you're gonna stop wasting my time while you decide between me and someone else. Riley, please, I love you. This thing with Vanessa, it's confusing me. But I chose you. I proposed to you. You chose the safe option, I corrected. The backup plan. The woman who would be grateful enough not to ask too many questions when you started having mysterious phone calls and secret lunches. I walked to my dresser and picked up the engagement ring. For a moment, I thought about throwing it at him, but that seemed unnecessarily dramatic. Instead, I held it out to him calmly. Take this. When you've decided whether you want to marry me or whether you want to be with Vanessa, or whether you just want to be alone, you can let me know. But I'm not going to be someone's consolation prize while you work through your feelings for someone else. He took the ring with shaking hands. What if I choose you? I smiled, and for the first time in days it felt genuine. Then you better have a damn good reason why I should choose you back. After he left, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened my laptop. I had a novel to finish, and for the first time in months, I had something real to write about. What I didn't expect was that choosing myself would lead to the most surprising revelation of all. 3 weeks later, Jessica found me at my usual corner table in Powell's Books, working on my laptop with a stack of notebooks beside me and a half-empty coffee cup that had long since gone cold. You look different, she said, sliding into the chair across from me. Different how? Like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. I saved my document. I'd written 30 pages in 3 weeks, more than I'd managed in the previous 6 months, and closed the laptop. How did it go? She asked. I'd told her about my ultimatum to Marcus, about the ring, about everything I'd discovered. She'd been my sounding board through the entire emotional earthquake. He chose Vanessa, I said simply. Jessica's face went through several expressions, landing on protective anger. That bastard, are you okay? I'm better than okay. I leaned back in my chair, surprised by how true that was. He came by yesterday to officially end things. Apparently, he and Vanessa had been texting every day since she moved back, and they've decided to explore their connection. I'm so sorry, Riley. Don't be. You know what he said when he gave me back the ring? He said he hoped I'd understand that sometimes you have to follow your heart, even when it hurts people. Jessica made a disgusted noise. The audacity! But here's the thing, I continued, pulling out my phone. I followed my heart too. I submitted 3 chapters and a proposal to an agent last week. She wants to see the full manuscript. Jessica's eyes widened. Riley, that's incredible. And I applied for a teaching position at a progressive arts school in Portland. They want creative educators who are also practicing artists. I have an interview next week. You're leaving? I'm choosing myself. For the first time in my adult life, I'm making decisions based on what I want, not what other people think I should want. I looked around the bookstore, at the shelves full of stories written by people who'd probably been told they were dreamers, that they should be more practical, more grateful for stable options. My mother called this morning, I said. She wanted to know if Marcus and I were still planning a summer wedding. When I told her we'd broken up, she said, well, I hope you're satisfied with yourself. He was the best thing that ever happened to you. What did you say? I said, no, Mom, the best thing that happened to me was realizing I deserve better than someone who sees me as a consolation prize. Then I hung up. Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. You know what's funny? I thought losing Marcus would feel like losing everything. Instead, it feels like finding everything. My writing, my voice, my sense of self-worth. All the things I'd been quietly sacrificing to be someone's acceptable choice. That evening, alone in my apartment, I opened my laptop and started writing again. Not about heartbreak or betrayal, but about a woman who discovers that sometimes the greatest love story is the one you write with yourself. And when my mother calls, which she will, probably tomorrow, with some lecture about pride and practicality, I won't hang up. I'll listen politely, thank her for her concern, and then tell her about my book deal, when it happens, my new job, when I get it, and my life full of choices that please me first. Because I learned something important from that engagement party, from Marcus's cruel revelations, from my own quiet revolution. The people who truly love you don't see you as lucky to be chosen. They see themselves as lucky to know you. And anyone who doesn't, well, they never deserved a seat at your table anyway. The ring is in my jewelry box now, not as a symbol of what I lost, but as a reminder of what I refused to accept. Sometimes the best thing someone can do for you is show you exactly who they are before you legally bind yourself to them. I'm writing my own story now. And this time, I'm the protagonist. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.